Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 20. This is the word of the Lord. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now, get up, go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, saying, "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. At once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. This is the word of the Lord. We're going through Acts. Many of you have been here throughout the weeks to see what this early Christian community looks like, and what they're doing. That they're not just energetic. There's something dynamic about them. People are hearing this message of the gospel. They're seeing these people go out and serve the poor, serve the sick, the marginalized. And they're finding that there's something attractive about this community. They're finding that the gospel is extremely attractive. And that there's something that this new community of people is doing that's radical, and it's before the church is institutionalized. It's before the church is a founded religion with buildings and coded doctrine. Well, not that that's bad, but this is before all of that. And what's happened is this early community, almost all of them, most of them at the beginning, had a real experience with the risen Jesus Christ. And because they had that, their lives were forever changed. We've seen how they start using their money differently. They start using their time and their energy differently. They start, as we saw Philip last week, start going out to people who would be their enemies, who would hate them, and yet they're loving them. And of course, today we're looking at Paul. I'm going to just flip between calling him Paul and Saul, of course, because most of you know him by Paul, but of course he was named Saul at the beginning. So I'm going to keep flipping back and forth. But Saul's conversion, and this story, it's probably one of the most famous conversions of human history. I mean, almost, even if you're not a Christian, people know this story, the road to Damascus and the light shining and Paul having this dramatic experience. And whenever you talk about conversion, before I go further, it's a little tricky because for non-Christians will say, oh, conversion, it's almost like a dirty word. You're trying to get me to believe what you believe. You're trying to get me to be a moral person. And we'll see that that's not actually what happens at all. Something even more dramatic happens. But even in Christian circles, talking about conversion can be a tricky topic. Because naturally people want to know, is this conversion, the famous one of Paul, is that the way all Christians are supposed to be converted? And if it is, then that didn't happen to me, and so therefore, what does that mean for me? And it's very, very tricky. And I'm going to, before I go further, obviously throughout the New Testament, throughout the Bible, there are numerous accounts of conversions, and they are all different. They're varied. Some are dramatic, some are light on the road, some are slower, some are more gradual, and some come with a bang, and some come with a little bit of a whimper. But I want to look today at Paul's conversion and see that there's a few elements in this conversion story that even if you have been Christian for years, that hopefully they're going to take hold of you and make you see conversion in a new light and make you and hopefully learn something from Paul's conversion. There's 3 elements here, 3 things that happened to Paul. And before I do the 3, I know last week I said I wasn't going to do my 3 points anymore, and I said I was going to do 3 narratives, and I'm back to my 3 points. Not really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these 3 points, but I'm going to believe I'm going to say this. I'm going to wrap them like a burrito, sort of, around. I'm going to make a sermon burrito sermon. Can you do that? I don't know. I'm going to take a narrative, my life, and I'm going to wrap it around these 3 points to illustrate that if your conversion wasn't like Paul's, or if you're not at that place, nonetheless, these elements are still persistent in every conversion. They show up all the time. And I realized last year somebody asked me about my faith, my conversion, my experience, and I realized that I've never actually shared that testimony. So today I'm going to do that in snippets. So like I said, I'm going to take these 3, and I had a seminary professor who said, never use food illustrations in a sermon. And somebody said, why would you not? Food is great. Food is universal. And he said, on a Sunday morning, if you start talking about food, people start thinking about food, and I guarantee you are all thinking about burritos right now, right? I'm starting to think about a burrito, and I can't believe I even used that one. Anyway, I'm devolving in this message quickly. I'm going to wrap this in my narrative so that you can get a glimpse of this, but I want you to compare it to yours too. First, there's 3 things that happened. Paul gets knocked down, he gets knocked out, and he gets knocked in. He gets knocked down from his own agenda. He gets knocked out of his self-centeredness, and he gets knocked into community. And these elements are always in conversions. First, he gets knocked down. Physically, he does, obviously. The light comes in and he gets knocked down. But what's really going on? Let's peel this back a little bit and apply it to our lives. Paul has a plan. Do you see this? He's got a plan. He's got a strategy. He knows he's on a mission. He's going to Damascus with the intent to take Christians, these new believers, and throw them into prison. And from Paul's worldview, from his religious perspective, God would never become a human being. That was blasphemous to say that the Lord of the universe, the Lord of the Bible, would come into human form. And yet, that's what these Christians are saying. Or these followers, they say, of the way is what they call them. And so Paul has a plan. He's sure of himself. He knows God. He knows who God ought to be and where God ought to be. And he knows it's silly, it's blasphemous, it's heretical to say that God would come in a human form. He knows. He's 100% sure of it, so sure that he goes off and gets a letter from the high priest to give him permission. That's how sure he is. He had a plan. And on the way with his plan, with his strategy, with his little 5-year agenda, on the way to Damascus, of course, this light comes in. Now, what's happening here? Do you notice that it says he falls down? He doesn't fall down because of the voice. He doesn't fall down because it's a bumpy road. It says that he fell down because of what? The light. And what is the light? You go back and look through the Old Testament. Light, of course, has many different meanings in the Bible. But you go Psalm 119, you're a light unto my path. And Jesus calls himself the light of the world. What light does, fundamentally, light exposes reality. If I take you in a dark room, of course, and it's really, really dark, or even if it's kind of dark, I could tell you the room's clean, or I could tell you the room's dirty, and you probably wouldn't know unless it smelled or something like that. You wouldn't really know if the room was clean or dirty because it's pretty dark. But if you flip on the lights, of course, what happens? Reality. You know. And in the same way, Paul, though he's on the way with his plan, his agenda, and he knows exactly who God is, he's sure of who God is, he gets knocked down, and to the point that he has to say, "Who are you, Lord?" Now what's happening here is that God is confronting Saul's very definition of who God is. He's saying, listen, in essence, translated, he's saying, Saul, do you really think you know me that well? Do you think that I am who you've constructed in your mind? See, Saul worshiped a God that wasn't going to challenge him, that wasn't going to knock him down. But Jesus says, I am a Lord who knocks you down. When you have a plan for your life that you're so sure about, when you know how I ought to operate, when you know where I ought to be in your life, that's when Jesus comes in conversion, and he knocks us down. Now, how does this apply to me? I said, here's the burrito time. Here's where I'm going to wrap it up. For me, I was 8 years old when I was baptized. The pastor said, it was one of those, I was at a Nazarene church in Cleveland, Ohio, and he said, who wants to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? And of course I raised my hand. I wanted to make my dad proud because my dad was a man of the Bible. I still remember every Sunday morning he'd be sweating and crying, reading the Bible before going to church. And I said, basically, I raised my hand and looked over to my dad to kind of get credit. And I remember, I remember being baptized, and I was 8 years old, and I had my big head. I remember I told you about my melon head, and my little body, and I had to wear the white robe, and it was the dunk style, full immersion. And I was so proud too, because you had to come up with a Bible verse. And I remember I was the first one, because my name's AA. I was the first one to go in a long line of people, and I said, I'm going to wow these people. I got something for them. I'm going to drop a theological gem on them in my Bible verse. My dad, he thinks he knows the Bible. Wait till he hears this one. I stand up there. I remember I puffed up my chest and I said, John 3:16 tells us. And I realized later on that everybody knew John 3:16 already. It was nothing new. But anyway, I was baptized. I was in the church all my life growing up. We went to church every single Sunday. I remember one Sunday reaching behind my desk drawer to pick up my dime and a nickel of offering, pulled the lamp fell on my head, cracked my head literally open. We went to the hospital, wrapped my head up, and still went to church that morning. That's how devout my family was to go to church. So we went every single week. I grew up in the church, but here's the thing. When I got to New York City and went to college, I started to realize what my relationship was with God truly. See, I knew everything about God. I had gone to all the church services. I'd volunteered in the children's ministry, and still to that point, I could not say that God was intimate to me. I kept God at an arm's length. I would tell people, yes, I go to church, and of course in New York City, that's not that popular to tell people. So then I started not saying I go to church, and then I started not actually going to church, and then my brother invited me to a small, and here's the lack of intimacy that I had. He invited me to a small group meeting in an Asian American household, and when I walked in and I saw that everybody had taken their shoes off, I refused to take my shoes off, and I said, I can't stay here, I have to go, and I left. That's the intimacy issues I had. I couldn't even take off my shoes in a group of people. And it's the same way in my relationship with God. Throughout my early time in New York City and college, throughout my entire time growing up, God was in my head. I knew who God was, just like Paul did. I knew what God wanted. I knew God's plan for my life. And I was in the music business, and I knew God wanted to make me successful in the music business. Churning along, and then my junior year happened. And this was where I got knocked down. During my junior year, it was a perfect storm of events. I'm going to say some of them, I can't even get through all of them. Extreme financial difficulties. I was faced with leaving school. So my school career looked over. My life in the music business wasn't working too well, and if you remember my old Floby story, it was because somebody had backstabbed me at my work when I was working at MTV, and basically I'd been kind of ushered out the door and was looking for other opportunities. So career, not so good. School, really not so good. At that time, I had a huge falling out with my brother. If you've heard me talk about him, he's 2 years older than me. We were extremely close. We had a major falling out to the point that we didn't talk for, I don't even know how long, 6, 7 months? Not a word, and we lived in the same city, 2 blocks from each other. Career bad, school horrible, family horrible. And then I thought, I went out with one of my best friends, and I thought, surely she's going to be compassionate. You know, everybody else has kind of abandoned me. And I'm at the lowest of the low, literally, in my life, lowest point ever. I said, surely she will be a source of compassion for me and a comfort. I sit down with her, and the very first thing she tells me is, I have cancer, her. Okay, so I hope I'm painting this picture for you, how God is truly knocking me down. And he's about to knock me out, as we'll see with Paul, but before I get there, it came to a head one moment in my room, my little shabby dorm room at NYU, and I had a shared apartment with another guy, but my own private room. And I remember sitting on my ground, this dirty floor, and just all of a sudden just lost it. I'm not a crier, you guys know that. I hardly have emotions. I have to peel real deep to get those out. I lost it. I was sobbing and crying. At that point, of course, you're a 20-year-old kid, everything's gone. My family wasn't talking to me for the most part. My friend just had told me she had cancer. I'm about to lose my school, I have no idea where I'm going in my life. Every plan and construct that I had had of God at that moment, God was not helping me. See, if we have a God that we create in our mind, which is what I was doing, and not an intimate God who knows us personally,